And welcome back to another episode of the Double Doing Podcast. My name is Brendan Deek. Thanks so much for tuning in today. If you haven't already, hit that subscribe button. It would be greatly appreciated. You can also rate the podcast and review the podcast wherever you listen to your podcast. It would also be greatly appreciated. We have a really cool episode coming for you today. I am joined by the host of Get Up on ESPN, and he's the author of a new book, Got Your Number, The Greatest Sports Legends and Numbers They Own. Mike Greenberg of ESPN's with me. Mike, what's going on?
I'm doing well, Brandon. Thank you very much for having me on.
Oh, thanks for jumping on. Really appreciate it. So I'm starting to dive into your book. Super interesting. I'm really excited to finish it. And you did a tremendous job. So I just wanted to congratulate you on all the success with this book and the idea. I think this is a really cool idea. I think coming up with this with this idea for a sports book might not have been easy. So I kind of want to start there. What was the inspiration behind this book and what made you want to write it?
Well, thank you for the kind words. So yeah, I've always wanted to do a sports book. And the reality is I just didn't have a good enough idea. As you know, from doing broadcasting, and I have done all these years, an idea that could sustain a broadcast segment is yay big. It's pretty small. An idea that could sustain an entire book has got to be something obviously much bigger. And I just didn't have one. And then one day we were sitting around the staff of Get Up after the show one day. And because we're a bunch of sports geeks, the subject turned to the fact that so many NFL Hall of Fame quarterbacks all wore the same jersey number, specifically the number 12. Joe Namath, Ken Stabler, Bob Greasy, Terry Bradshaw, Roger Staubach, Jim Kelly, and then soon to be Tom Brady and Aaron Rodgers. They'll both be in the Hall of Fame, of course. And one of the members of the staff said to me, Greeny, they all wore the number 12, but who owns the number 12? And Brendan, it was like a light bulb went off over my head. I thought, oh my goodness, I finally have the idea. So I brought on board my main man, Hembo, who has been doing my research and my stats for me for over a decade. And together we chose the 100 greatest legends and the numbers they own. So who owns the number 1, the number 2, the number 3, the number 4, all the way through to 100 in sports history. It required a lot of creativity, a couple of tough decisions. And then he went off and researched each of them, and I wrote the chapters. So there are 100, like 2 to 3 page chapters about each of them, in which there is a tremendous amount of magnificent detail and really fascinating information that Hembo dug up in the research. So what I like about the book is about 50% is sports debate, which is to say I had to make some tough decisions. Who deserved the number 4? Who deserved the number 21? I chose someone. You might strongly disagree with the choice that I made. That's the debate part of it, and that's fun. Mm-hmm. But then whether you agree or disagree, when I was growing up, I loved sports history books. I read so much about sports history, and I feel like that's becoming something of a lost art. So this one, the rest of it is all history, whether you agree or disagree with the positions that I took. I hope that you will find fascinating the information that we found about each of the 100 sports legends. So it's equal parts sports debate and sports history, and in that regard, I think it really works. So I couldn't be more thrilled, and I have really enjoyed some of the early feedback that we've received.
So you said you have a partner on this book that did most of kind of the research and brought it to you, and then you kind of constructed from there. When he brought you that research, was there a statistic or anything that kind of caught you off guard that you did not know? That was off the top of
every one of them. I would say there are at least 100 things in the book that I did not know, which is to say a minimum of one per hero, per legend, per chapter was something I did not know. And I would be willing to bet that no matter how astute a sports fan you think you are, and I don't just mean you, but anyone within the sound of our voices right now, I would be willing to bet you everything I have that there will be at least one thing in each of these chapters that you will say, wow, I had no idea of that. And that is hopefully, in my opinion, that's the single best thing about the book. And I think real sports fans will feel that way.
What was your favorite number to dissect?
It's very hard to say my favorite number. I can tell you what the hardest ones to do were. Look, 3 was easy. 23 was easy. 42 was easy. 99 was easy. Those were easy. 6 was easy. While we were writing the book, the NBA actually retired the number 6 universally throughout the league. So those were easy to do. Some of them were brutal. I know that you are Canadian, and I can see the hockey pictures behind you. So if you haven't gotten to it yet, I will ask you, who do you believe owns the number 4 in sports history? It could be Lou Gehrig.
Guy right there, Bobby Orr.
So it is Bobby Orr.
Yeah.
Lou Gehrig, Brett Favre. That was a really, really difficult choice. We did choose Orr. That was an incredibly tough choice to make. I can tell you, Brendan, that in the early stages of the promotion of this book, which I've been doing, I've done quite a few interviews like this one. I've had quite a few people challenge me on that, strongly believing that Lou Gehrig deserves that number. And I get it. I think in terms of his stature, in terms of, here we are 80 years after his career ended and his tragic death. He is still a remembered and revered figure for any number of reasons, some of them, of course, tragic. But what I could not, and I do take those things into account as I make these decisions, but what I could not divorce from my mind in this is that Bobby Orr is the second greatest hockey player that ever lived. It's Wayne Gretzky, and then it's Bobby Orr. And then you can start arguing over Gordie Howe and Mario Lemieux and whoever else you want to put in that conversation. Lou Gehrig is not the second greatest baseball player that ever lived. Brett Favre is nowhere near the second greatest football player that ever lived. And that was where I differentiated it, because I felt that the careers were not close enough, in my opinion, to justify breaking a tie with Gehrig's timelessness. I mean, the speech, great, luckiest man on the face of the earth. The fact that, even to this day, some people know the disease as Lou Gehrig's disease. The fact that they made movies about his life and all the rest of that. That stuff is incredibly important. And he is unquestionably a legend, maybe a more legendary figure in sports than Bobby Orr is. But Bobby Orr's stature as a player, his accomplishments as a player are so extraordinary that I felt it would have been unjust not to give him the number.
One of my favorite broadcasters of all time is Bob McCowan. He used to work for Sportsnet. He wrote a book. It was called, I believe, The Top 50 Hockey Arguments. And he spoke about Bobby Orr in the book, about Bobby Orr actually being the greatest hockey player of all time. And that was one of his arguments. Of course, it's so hard. Wayne Gretzky owns every record. Like, it's so hard to debate that. And one of his points was, go look at Bobby Orr's YouTube highlights and go look at Bobby Orr. Just go watch the guy play. And it's pretty remarkable the way he would be able to skate and navigate through defenses. So I think you made the right choice there.
Well, I'll tell you, here's something that I don't know that all fans in this day and age know. I'm just going to read to you directly from the chapter. Perhaps most remarkable of all of Orr's achievements is how he managed to accomplish so much in so little time. His style of play was so hard on his knees, they gave out on him at a young age. He only played 36 games after the season in which he turned 26 years old.
It's crazy.
So he accomplished everything by the time he was 26 and still left a mark on the sport, statistically speaking, that has never been approached, has never even been touched. So I finished the chapter by quoting Frank DeFord, the legendary sports columnist for Sports Illustrated, who wrote, "It's not necessary to get into who may be better, or the defenseman, or Wayne Gretzky, the center, except to note that Orr did something that Gretzky had no opportunity to do, and that was change the very nature of the game." Mm-hmm. So again, if you ask me who's the greatest hockey player that ever lived, I will tell you Wayne Gretzky.
Yes.
But I believe Orr is next, and I believe it would have been an injustice for him not to be in the book.
Any other hockey players in the book?
Mm-hmm.
Wayne Gretzky, of course.
Absolutely. Gretzky is 99. Yeah. There are 4. I believe Gordie Howe is in the book and Mario Lemieux is in the book.
Was there kind of a tough distinction to say we need a certain amount of players in each sport?
No.
In this book? No.
I refused to do that. So that was obviously something that we talked about. Do we need okay. So let's go all the way back to the beginning. Mm-hmm. We decide we want to do the book. We have the idea for the numbers. We sit down and we're going through the jersey numbers. And then at one point it hit me in our very first conversation. I looked at Hembo and I said, so are we about to do a book about the greatest sports legends of all time, and it's not going to have Muhammad Ali in it, and it's not going to have Serena Williams in it, and it's not going to have Tiger Woods in it, and it's not going to have Billie Jean King in it, because they don't have jersey numbers. We realized we had to extend beyond the jersey numbers in order to be able to incorporate all of the great stars. So once that crystallized in our minds, and that was at the very beginning, then we were able to get a little bit more creative. So once I realized that we were open to all sports, I said, we cannot allow ourselves to be thinking, well, we need to get another boxer in there. So, don't put Bobby Orr in so you can put Sugar Ray Robinson in. Like, that just didn't seem like the right thing to do. So I can actually give you the distribution because Hembo did it for me. There are 24 football players, 20 baseball players, 14 basketball players, 9 teams, 5 Olympians, 5 boxers, 5 golfers, 4 hockey players, 4 tennis players, 3 coaches, 2 drivers, and a horse. That is the distribution on the heroes.
I have a great example of this too. Like you have number 18, you have Jack Nicklaus instead of Peyton Manning. And number 28, you have Michael Phelps over Cristiano Ronaldo and Adrian Peterson. So were those tough decisions, I'm guessing?
Yes, but Michael Phelps has to be in the book. Michael Phelps is 28 because that's how many gold medals he won. And if you're not, so you have to just consider the greatness. Michael Phelps is so far and away the greatest ever at what he did. It's ridiculous. He won 28 Olympic medals. He is the most decorated Olympian in history. 23 of those medals were gold. That's by far the most. Do you know what the second most gold medals for any Olympian in history is? Michael Phelps won 23. This is in any sport, any discipline, any nation. He won 23 gold medals. How many do you think the person who finished second won?
It's got to be in the teens, right? Maybe even less than that.
9.
9, yeah.
He won 23. The next closest person won 9.
Oh, man.
Well, how do you not put him in?
For sure, yeah.
So now we're considering the number. Could I give him 23? I most certainly could not. That's Michael Jordan's number. So we had to come up with a number. So that's how he got 28. And he was deserving of that ahead of anyone. Which other one did you just point out?
So number 18, you have Jack Nicklaus over Peyton Manning.
Nicklaus is the greatest golfer that ever lived. I know younger people, and I am the world's biggest Tiger Woods fan, like to say Tiger Woods is the greatest golfer that ever lived. He isn't. He's the best golfer that ever lived. At his apex, he would have beaten anybody.
That's a great distinction. The best and the greatest. You know that, like,
it's the same thing as saying Tom Brady is the greatest football player that ever lived. Doesn't mean he's the best.
Yeah, agreed.
And golf is obviously more all-encompassing. But at the end of the day, Jack Nicklaus just won more because he lasted longer. I mean, Jack Nicklaus won the Masters when he was 46 years old. The Tiger Woods' greatness, because of all the injuries and everything, like Tiger Woods' prime ended 10 years too early. He should have, look, if his body just sort of held together, you can basically take all the numbers that he has and double them. He would have lapped Jack or anybody else. But part of greatness in sports is that longevity. And that's why, to go back to our Bobby Orr conversation, that he was able to accomplish that much in that short period of time is, candidly, it's almost unimaginable. So anyway, Jack Nicklaus has to be in the book. And 18 is the number. He won 18 majors, and that is a record that not only will he die holding that record, all of us will die. You're a lot younger than I am. And when you die, hopefully a really long time from now, the record for most career majors won will be 18, Jack Nicklaus. That is a record that is not getting challenged.
What's a football player that you left off the list that you really wanted to put on, but ultimately couldn't?
That's a good one. Trying to think of that now. The football players, football we did pretty well. Football players aren't generally as connected to the numbers. Here, I'll answer that question this way. The hardest decision I had to make, was putting Jerry Rice in the book. And here's what I mean by that. Jerry Rice had to be in the book. Too great a player. You cannot do a list. You cannot do a compilation of the greatest athletes of all time and not have Jerry Rice in it. But because we could not come up with another number for him besides 80, the Miracle on Ice team is not in it.
Yeah, that's what I was just going to say. When I think of 80, the number 80, I think of Miracle on Ice.
So does everyone.
Yeah.
And that was brutal. But what I decided was, when in doubt, I defaulted to the jersey number, which is to say Jerry Rice deserved to be in there with his jersey number. I could have created probably some other number for Jerry Rice because he caught this many touchdowns or whatever, although they're all over 100. So we would have to have figured that out. But so that was brutal. So that isn't a football player we left out, but that was the toughest omission that came about because of a football player. So I'll turn it back that way. Who's another football player that didn't make it? Well, Deion Sanders was a brutal one. Dion wore number 21. Tim Duncan wore number 21.
Wow.
Roberto Clemente wore number 21.
Yeah, that's definitely a tough one.
That and 4 were our 2 hardest decisions.
Okay.
Have you seen that chapter? Do you know who we chose?
Yes, you chose Clemente, I believe,
That's
right?
correct.
Yeah.
So I was going to ask you, if not, who would you have taken? Who would you, if this was Brendan's book, who would you have put?
Well, I never got the chance to watch Clemente. I watched Deion Sanders was a guy I grew up he was a highlight reel, right? And he was a walking highlight reel. He was one of the best defensive players of all time. So I probably would have leaned Deion Sanders, but I understand the reasoning why he went there. And that's what the great part about this book is. Like, if you and your buddy read this book, you guys can debate forever, right? Like, on
to be
who.
Clear, I didn't see Roberto Clemente play either.
Yeah.
I'm not that much older than you. But here's what I'll say about Roberto Clemente. His impact as a human being was so extraordinary on top of his play that was what separated it for us. The humanitarian award in Major League Baseball is known as the Roberto Clemente Award, and not by accident. The Roberto Clemente Award is presented annually to the player who demonstrates the values that the Hall of Famer displayed in his commitment to sportsmanship, community, and helping others. So that was what separated it for me. But clearly, leaving Deion out, he's not only is he so great, but he's so associated with the number. That was a very tough one.
Did you run into any problems with players that have had multiple jersey numbers in figuring out where to slot them?
Actually, it helped.
Okay.
So Kobe Bryant wore 8 and 24. Mm-hmm. His career was divided exactly down the middle by the 2 numbers. He played exactly half as 8 and half as 24. So we could choose either one we wanted. And what that enabled us to do was give Willie Mays 24. So that worked out really well. If Kobe had only worn 24, now I'm in the impossible position of not giving either Kobe, either one or the other, not giving Kobe Bryant or Willie Mays their number. Now, I could have created a number, and I would have, for whichever one of them didn't get 24. But you tell me how you're choosing between them.
Yeah.
So that actually made it easier for me. I was able to give Kobe 8, which wasn't easy either because Cal Ripken wore 8. But I gave it to Kobe, and I gave Mays 24.
So speaking of Kobe Bryant, your chapter on him was beautiful. It was really cool to read that one. He's one of my favorite athletes of all time. I still can't process the fact that he's gone. You've been in the NBA industry for majority of your career. You follow this game closely. Some of my favorite content still going is hearing Kobe Bryant stories and about what he was like as a person. So I was wondering if you can give me your favorite Kobe Bryant story.
Well, what I default to on that. So Kobe, when he retired, he was doing an event. He was invited to do an event by the Clinton Global Health Initiative, which was President Clinton's. He was long out of office by then. Had and still has this thing called the Clinton Global Health Initiative that tries to increase the healthcare and generally focusing primarily on nutrition and other things around the planet. And they had this, sure what you call it, like a convention. It's the wrong word, but like a collection where they brought people into this think tank and they gave all these presentations and speeches and whatever. And it was in Palm Springs, California. And President Clinton invited a number of people, including Kobe Bryant. And I was invited to be the moderator of a panel. And I moderated a panel. And I will tell you, Brendan, in my 30-something years in the business, this was probably the highlight that I ever had. On the stage for 45 minutes, President Clinton, Kobe Bryant, and me. And my job was to moderate that discussion. And it was unbelievable. I mean, it was so good. I had almost nothing to do with it. Those are 2 brilliant, fascinating, insightful, incredible people. Mm-hmm. So when it was over, Kobe was really happy with the way it went. And I received the delightful honor of becoming his go-to interviewer, which meant as he went around and did these kind of events, not usually with the president, but just by himself, if he was going to speak at this conference or that conference or whatever it was, he didn't like to just get up behind a podium and give like a 1-hour presentation. He liked to do a Q&A, and he was comfortable with me. So I got a ton of gigs out of that, just unbelievable, memorable things, traveling all over the country to go sit on a stage and interview him for 45 minutes to an hour. So we had wonderful experiences with that. And, you know, I don't, when I say I got to know him well, I don't mean to overstate it. Our families didn't get together for dinner or anything, but I felt, you know, that was a pretty intimate connection when you're just sitting there, just talking, the two of you. And he was so open and honest about things. So the last time I ever saw him, I think I wrote about this in the book. The last time I ever saw him was at the NBA store in New York in March of the year before he died. So March of 19. And he was promoting this children's book that he had done. And we met and I did an interview with him. And I remember the topic of conversation, the primary one that sticks out in my head, was I asked him about his take on all the debates. And I said, Kobe, when you sit there and people say, who was better, Kobe or Michael? Who was better, Magic or Larry? Who was better, Kobe or Russell or Wilt or all of them? I said, as a person who's actually in those debates, how do you feel about that? And he looked me right in the face and he said, I don't care at all. He said, you have your career, you do the best you can, and then you leave it there and you let other people discuss that stuff. And that is what makes me sadder than anything else about what happened to him, whatever it was, 10 months later, because he really meant that. Like a lot of players say, I don't care what people say about me. He really meant it. He had left that behind and he had so many aspirations. He had so many things he wanted to do. He was a very young man. Mm-hmm. And, you know, he was, I think, 12 or 13 years younger than me. And he had so much life left to live and so many things left to do. And he was really looking forward to them. So that's what makes me as sad as anything when I think about him. But anyway, that is that's how I got to know him, and that is my most powerful memory.
That was great to hear. I like how he said that he didn't care, because part of the problem with, I feel like, basketball media nowadays is everyone likes to talk legacy and they don't just talk about the player in real time. And I think that's kind of a frustrating part of basketball talk. And I think he nailed it.
Yeah, I mean that. Yeah. You know, he had so much. You know, and I guess this Mamba mentality is that piece. But he was so self-assured. He was so confident in who he was as a player and more importantly as a person, that the validation of other people just really didn't matter to him that much. It really didn't. I'm not saying that he didn't have an ego like all people, but what I mean is that if someone said, man, Michael Jordan was better than you, I don't think he really cared that much. If Michael said, I'm better than you, I think that would bother him.
Yeah.
If Mike Greenberg said Kobe Bryant was not as good as Michael Jordan, I don't think it made a damn bit of difference to Kobe. And I think that's exactly the right position for someone like him to take.
Okay, let's talk about kind of your personal life and becoming a writer. Is this something that you've always wanted to do? And for this book, has it been different than other books you've wrote? So this is going to be your 5th book, correct?
It's the 6th one that I've been involved in. I didn't write the Mike and Mike book, so we had a writer that worked with us on that. So if you don't include that, then it's the 5th book I've written. But one of them was a children's book that I did with my wife Stacy. But
so what was different?
Sorry.
Well, I was just gonna ask, what was different maybe about this book than, let's say, the one that you wrote titled "My Father's Wives"?
Hugely different. Mm-hmm. So My Father's Wives is a novel. All you could ask for is a novel. Even why my wife thinks I'm an idiot. While it was not a novel, it was more creative writing than anything else. The process of those was painstaking. You need to create an entire story in your head. You need to create characters. You need to build an entire world. I would lock myself in a very, very quiet corner of the library in the Connecticut town where we lived at the time, and just shut myself off from the world. And it was such hard work. And there were days where nothing would come, and it was really, really hard. Now the end result was the most satisfying things that I've ever accomplished, regardless of how well received the books were or how much money they made or didn't make. I'm not prouder of anything than I am of the books that I've written. This experience was totally different. Hembo sends me the information. I go through it. I figure out how to organize it in an interesting way. and then I write it more journalistically than anything else. I'm just telling the story of a person, or in some cases a team, or a coach or whatever. But I'm just telling a story about why this number belongs to someone. And so that was a much more interactive, much less painstaking and excruciating process. So it was more fun than small bites. It was in that regard, it was much easier to write, in the same way that I think it'll be much easier to read. This will be the easiest book to read that anyone will ever read, because you could just sit down at any time. Each chapter will probably take you 5 minutes to read, if that. So anytime you have 10 minutes, you sit down, you read a couple of chapters, you put it down, you pick it up again, whatever it might be. And so the writing of it was kind of like that too. So it was a much less arduous experience than I've had in the past.
Did you think when you were a kid that you were going to be a 5-time author? Did you think?
Yeah, I hoped. My parents were writers and authors, travel writers actually, and owned a bookstore. And so I grew up around books, and I've always been around books, and I've always loved books. I love the way they look. I love the way they smell. I love the way they feel. I love bookstores. On a day off, on a rainy Saturday, which it's supposed to be here in New York this weekend, I'm going to go to a bookstore, as I always do, and just browse around. I just like it. So yes, I always hoped I would write books, and I have every intention of continuing to, for the rest of my life.
You should. You got a ton of knowledge on sports, especially. So I hope you continue to do it. So before we get out of here, I got to ask you, it's a Double Doink podcast, so I got to ask you about the Philadelphia Eagles. I'm obligated to. I do kind of blame you for the Super Bowl loss, because you picked the Chiefs and Patrick Mahomes win the MVP. So I just wanted to get that off. Like, it is kind of your fault that the Eagles did lose.
Although generally speaking, my picks are usually so bad, we call them the kiss of death, the hashtag KOD. So frankly, you probably were better off that I picked the Chiefs and Mahomes. I still hate the way that Super Bowl ended. I hate that call. I remain a little bit surprised by that one. I remain shocked by the last one that the Eagles won, or the only one, I guess, that the Eagles won. I was there for that game in Minnesota when they beat Brady, when Brady played probably the best Super Bowl game that any quarterback has ever played, and lost.
Threw for 500 yards and lost.
His team didn't punt. And he threw for 500 yards, no interceptions. His team never punted, and they lost. It's almost impossible to do. And I wonder how many other games of any kind in NFL history that would hold true. So, but what do I think of them? I mean, obviously they've lost a few pieces, but they have ample opportunity to make that up. I mean, the 2 first-round picks is just unbelievable. Howie Roseman has done just an incredible job there of putting them in position. So I think they remain. Look, I mean, with Rodgers out of the conference, I think right now Jalen Hurts is the best quarterback in the NFC, which is incredible when you consider at this time last year, most people thought that he was probably just going to keep that job for one more season, and that would be that. Now he's the best quarterback in the conference. The defense might take a small step back. They should still be really good. The receivers should remain as good as they've been. Kelsey came back, which I think is critically important. So I think the Eagles go into the season. I think it's neck and neck. I think there's 2 teams, and then everybody else when the season begins in the NFC. It's them in San Francisco. And then let's see what winds up happening. Let's see if Detroit is really as good as people are excited they might be. Let's see what Dallas is. There's always questions with them. Do the Giants take a step forward or take a step back? Who else is there? The entire South stinks.
Yeah.
Everyone else in the West, I think, is largely bad. So
I'm an Eagles fan that actually thinks the Dallas Cowboys are a good team, and I won't poo-poo them. I respect them. Dak Prescott has torched the Eagles since he's been in the league. Like, he dominates Midnight Green. So I think it's a 3-team race. Cowboys.
That was a really disappointing season. I'm a little worried about the Cowboys.
Okay. Why so?
As I say, I think Dak took a big step back. Perhaps he and Kellen Moore were not on the same page as the offensive coordinator. Maybe Mike McCarthy stepping in to call plays will be a step back in the right direction. If they rebuild that offensive line and sort of go back to being a run-first offense, that probably is their best bet. I think they're going to become a team that sort of leans on their defense. But when I say I'm worried about them, maybe what I mean more by that is I think the Eagles are decidedly better than they are. And I don't think that the gap between them, I see no reason to think that the gap between them should have closed that considerably.
Mm-hmm. I think an under talked about storyline so far this offseason, the fact that the Cowboys have not extended Dak Prescott. They push money to future years and restructure the contract, which opens the door for if he has a bad year this year, he's a free agent in 2024. That could be like the next Lamar Jackson kind of situation. I don't know. I don't think we'll ever see another Lamar Jackson situation, but the next star quarterback to kind of be maybe on the trade market, or who knows what's going to happen. So I think that's kind of the storyline for the Cowboys.
He already played a year on the franchise tag, so let's see where it goes.
Mike Greenberg of ESPN talking about his new book, Got Your Number, the greatest sports legends and the numbers they own. Mike, thanks so much for doing this. Really appreciate you coming on. You're an absolute legend in this business. Before we go, plug in where everyone can follow you on social media and where they can purchase the new book.
At ESPN Greeny on Twitter, at ESPN Greeny on Instagram. And as of Tuesday, April 4th, you can buy the book anywhere. If you walk into a store and it isn't there, let me know. And you can order it online anywhere you normally order books, and you can pre-order it before then online anywhere you order books.
Mike, thanks so much for doing this. Appreciate you.
It's my pleasure. Thank you for having me.